Happy Tuesday, pro-life family. Today we're talking with Alex Schadenberg of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. It's a little bit of a dark topic, but we need to discuss this. Grab your coffee. Let's get started. Pro-life family, happy Tuesday. Welcome to the table. I'm joined by my friend Kim Schwartz and our other friend Alex Schadenberg. Did I get that right? Schadenberg?
You got it right.
Cool.
Perfect.
Cool. So today we're changing topics a little bit. Still a pro-life issue, and the more we've chatted here leading into getting ready, I'm realizing this is a terrible topic, but it's already at our back door. We tend to think of the euthanasia issue, the assisted suicide issue, as being this thing. Europe does that, and they really shouldn't. They've gotten off track, but that's over there. But apparently it's at our back door now. So we started the discussion. This case in Canada came across my feed the other day. I shared it with Kim. Manitoba's first medically assisted death in a church was an intimate ceremony in Manitoba, Winnipeg area. And we were talking about how crazy this is. And then you brought up Oregon.
It gets worse.
It gets worse.
Well, in the U.S., I'll comment on the Manitoba situation first. You have a united church, which, say what you want. The fact of it is this was a member of that church, and she decided that she wanted to die in the church with all her family and friends around her. So they all came to greet her and everything. And then I believe the time the doctor showed up was like 1 PM or something like that.
Yeah, it's in here somewhere.
And so then they set her up, and then they lethally injected her, and she died there. So she got to say goodbye to everyone in her church setting. They did it even on the altar, which makes it even more concerning to me as a person who has a level of faith. But the fact of it is that this was supposedly this intimate experience. Now, just so you further understand that in Canada, there's been quite a few, funeral homes that have now set that up. So what's happening in a lot of the major cities is you'll have a couple of funeral homes who've now set up what they call a MAID room. Now, they call it MAID in Canada, medical aid in dying, so you can feel better about it. Because what euthanasia and assisted suicide is it's about killing you. So euthanasia is done by lethal injection. It is a form of homicide. But if you call it MAID, we all feel better. So they set up these MAID rooms so they can come to the funeral home, they can have it done. And I guess it's in a sense, the rooms are done quite nicely because it's a good connection for the funeral home, because then the person doesn't have to be moved or anything. Well, I guess they get moved downstairs for a couple of things. But I mean, the point of it is they're all right there already, and they say goodbye to everyone first. They get it done there.
Convenience.
And then after that, they have their funeral there and everything else.
Oh my gosh.
And it's getting pretty ghoulish, but that's exactly the way it's going.
You said that they did this on the altar. I'm pretty sure God has something to say about human sacrifice. Like, that seems really.
It was in the sanctuary, I should say. That'd be more. When I say on the altar, actually, that is the wrong idea in the sense. But it's in the sanctuary area.
Still,
yes.
It's not that much better.
I know it's not that much better in the sense, and I agree completely. The whole thing is a travesty, but you can see how, in that sort of secular point of view, the idea of having it all done in the church, there's lots of space there, etc., and how it seems like a loving way to go. It isn't a loving way to go. It is about abandoning people to death. It's not about caring for them, but nonetheless, this is the kind of idea that is being spread more and more.
And that one's across the border. And then we started talking Oregon.
Well, yeah, and I'm talking about the fact in the U.S. you have to be concerned because there's 10 jurisdictions now that have legalized assisted suicide, and Oregon was the first, right?
Okay.
So you now have 10. You've got 9 states, plus you have Washington, D.C. Right. And so last year, your neighbor New Mexico legalized assisted suicide, and that's the most radical law in America, the one that's in New Mexico. But Oregon, what happened is they recently had a court challenge to their residency requirement in Oregon. So that meant that to die in Oregon, you had to be an Oregon resident. And so by challenging the residency requirement, it would mean that anybody could die by assisted suicide in Oregon. And now, instead of it going to court, what happened is the Oregon Health Authority decided to settle it out of court, and so they agreed to drop the residency requirement. So how it is right now is you can now go, and I'm not trying to promote this really in any way, shape, or form. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to promote this, but the fact of it is it affects Texans. It affects people from all over the U.S. And it was done on purpose. Let's be brutally honest. It's done on purpose because the assisted suicide lobby is well aware that there are a lot of states that are never going to legalize assisted suicide. So you've got states like Oregon and Washington State and Vermont and all these type of states that have legalized assisted suicide. And then, of course, there's places like Texas and Mississippi or wherever or Louisiana that are never going to legalize assisted suicide. So therefore, if you eliminate the residency requirement, then people can still have assisted suicide. Now, you need to be concerned also by the fact that, as I say, New Mexico has the most wide open assisted suicide law in America. And I believe they actually never put in a residency requirement in the New Mexico law. So now that Oregon has dropped the residency requirement, I'm assuming New Mexico is the next place to start talking about, you can go to New Mexico for assisted suicide. Now, why is this such a big thing? Well, it makes it a national issue because it affects people everywhere in America. But on top of it, you have this other situation where currently they're saying that people who are going to die by assisted suicide will have to actually go to Oregon. But at the same time, the assisted suicide lobby is really promoting this issue of approvals of assisted suicide by telehealth. So it's a big push right now by the assisted suicide
So I don't
lobby.
have to physically be in Oregon or go to Oregon if I want assisted suicide. Now I can access these lethal drugs from telehealth.
Yeah, so with the telehealth, with these current drug rules in America, I'm assuming that you can't be approved for assisted suicide in Oregon and have the drug shipped to you in Texas. But I'm sure that the assisted suicide lobby is going to be pushing on that one next, okay? Because I'm sure that there are pharmacies in Texas who would be willing to do that if that were the case. But I'm assuming right now that that's not the case, that they can't do that. But right now, that's what they're pushing for telehealth, because then you would be approved, and then you would just fly to Oregon to die.
Oh my gosh.
Right? You just go to Oregon and die. But in the same way, New Mexico is your neighbor. So if they were to get all these approvals by telehealth, then you would just have to go to Albuquerque for your death.
Oh my gosh.
That's the kind of thing. And that's what they're pushing. And so you recognize that this whole expansion of assisted suicide is happening, and it's happening in increments of one thing after another after another. When we talk about the assisted suicide laws, let's be brutally honest what they've been doing. They've been pushing these laws, and they say, oh, well, we have all these safeguards in these laws. So the original Oregon law, I'll give you an example. The original Oregon assisted suicide law had a 15-day waiting period. It said that you had to be terminally ill, and that was defined as 6 months. Now, what does it mean to be 6 months from death? I know that, that's all questionable. I understand, but nonetheless, you could see how people would say, well, yeah, but that's not people, that's pretty reasonably tight is what it would be argued. You had to be mentally competent, right? You had to be, so they put in all these things in the beginning. It had to be approved by 2 doctors, et cetera, et cetera. Well, they've reduced and eliminated the residency requirement in Oregon. So they've changed it to 48 hours. They've said in Oregon that if you're seen to be terminally ill, they can waive the waiting period, so you can have same-day death. Now they've taken away the residency requirement. So what they do is they try and pass a law that they think is palatable for people to accept, and then they whittle away at it later. Now,
hang on. You said seem to be terminally ill?
Well, you seem to be terminally ill. How do you define these things? This is the difficulty. You might have. Let me get down to it. You can't force someone to accept medical treatment. We accept that. Right. If you had a medical condition, I can't force you to accept treatment. And there's no question about that, nor should we force you to accept treatment. So how the Oregon law and other assisted suicide laws are defined, even though they had that 6-month window issue, if you had a medical condition that if you did not accept medical treatment, you're likely to die within 6 months, you would qualify. So for instance, somebody who is insulin dependent, diabetic. Now, obviously, they're not terminally ill, but if you say no to insulin, obviously you're going to die within 6 months. Yeah. Therefore, you would qualify for assisted suicide in Oregon. And if you read the small print of it, so a lot of these things we sort of knew already. I'll tell you, this whole issue I'm talking to you about is actually not a new issue. A lot of people don't follow the assisted suicide issue, but several years ago there was a Swedish researcher. And he was trying to figure out exactly how the Oregon law worked. And he was then emailing back and forth with the people at the Oregon Health Authority. And they were quite clear, because obviously they didn't feel any threat by some guy in Sweden sending them emails. He's trying to figure out exactly how the Oregon law worked. And they made it very clear, yeah. Well, if you have a medical condition that could result in death within 6 months, you would qualify. So therefore, yes, someone who is, they say, if someone is insulin dependent, yes, they would qualify for assisted suicide. Well, then you come in with these other issues like things like anorexia, right?
Okay, yeah.
So we've recently had these cases. There was a write-up of a doctor in Colorado. So Colorado legalized assisted suicide a few years ago. And the one doctor in Colorado published just recently an article in a different, I forget what journal it was. It doesn't matter. It was published explaining the 3 assisted suicides she had done based on people who had anorexia.
Oh my god.
Now remember, anorexia is not a terminal condition. So this starts changing things quite quickly. Anorexia is defined as a chronic condition. The other thing about anorexia, yes, we know that there's a lot of people who go into it can be a very terrible situation where someone is so, how would you say, that they've not eaten, they become so weak that in fact it appears to be a terminal condition. And some people do die because of anorexia. Absolutely they do. But for the most of people who have it, they in fact don't die from anorexia. They do. Right. They go through bad times and they get better. And so when you think about that, obviously dead people do not get better from anorexia.
Right.
You're given lethal drugs, you're not getting better. It's not going to happen. So I guess in that sense, it would be terminal once you've received your lethal drugs. So if you start thinking about it, you can see how would you say, it's called bracket creep. You allow assisted suicide, and then of course you realize, oh, well, you don't have to accept medical treatment. If you don't have to accept medical treatment, well, there's lots of chronic conditions that if you don't accept medical treatment, you're going to die.
Yeah.
There's lots of conditions. So obviously they now qualify. And then if you start pushing the envelope on other things such as anorexia, etc. Now we recognize, as I say, some people die with anorexia. I understand this, so it's not a question. But when did this become a terminal condition? And you go on and on and on. So let's look at what's going on in California. So in California, you've got Dr. Shavelson, who's an assisted suicide doctor. And Dr. Shavelson has got a court case launched against the assisted suicide law in California. Now, what's he trying to do? He's trying to expand the law to euthanasia. So in this podcast, I've not explained to you the differences yet, but I will now.
Yeah.
So euthanasia is what we have in Canada, and that's done by lethal injection. So they lethally inject you with the lethal drugs.
But we call it something much kinder and gentler.
Right.
Medical aid in dying, they call it.
Right.
But,
if you
it is a form of homicide.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's considered legal or not, it's a form of homicide. And I always point out to people that when we legalized euthanasia in Canada, sorry, I'm a Canadian if you didn't realize that yet. Okay.
Hey.
Don't hold that against me. But I'm not going to talk about hockey. Anyway, if you look at our law in Canada, you realize that we legalized euthanasia by creating an exception to homicide. So if you look at Canada's criminal code under the Homicide Act, you'll notice the euthanasia law is in there because the only honest thing we did is we honestly said that this is an exception to homicide. Homicide is murder, so we recognize that. So anyway, getting back to it, euthanasia is done by lethal injection, whereas assisted suicide is done by giving you those same drugs, but you take it yourself. So that's the difference. Okay. The difference isn't the motivation. The difference isn't the fact that doctors are involved or not involved, because in the case of euthanasia, a doctor does it to you or a nurse does it to you. In the case of assisted suicide, the doctor prescribes, or as I say in New Mexico, nurses can do it, so nurses could prescribe, right? Nonetheless, what it is it's who does it. Mm-hmm. So in euthanasia, it's usually a doctor who's injecting you, whereas assisted suicide, you take the drugs yourself. So obviously when Shavelson is challenging the law, what he's saying is people with certain medical conditions, it's very difficult for them to take it themselves. Therefore, it's discrimination against them. Therefore, we have to, in certain cases, allow for lethal injection. It's actually somewhat of a logical argument. If you're going to allow killing, somebody might have a hard time being capable of killing themselves because of their medical condition. Therefore, it would seem to me if it's okay to kill, therefore it'd be okay to lethally inject also.
Wow.
You would seem that's somewhat of a logical argument. But the fact of it is it goes to the next step.
I mean,
it goes from assisting a suicide, which is a direct intentional act of prescribing lethal drugs. It goes from that to actually injecting somebody.
Yeah, and then we see on the, in Europe, how that has devolved too into now, not just are you taking the pills to kill yourself, then you have the lethal injections. In several countries in Europe, parents are making this decision for their kids of saying like, I'm going to euthanize my child, or because they're the medical decision maker, or somebody who's unconscious, or somebody else who like might not be making this decision for themselves. Somebody else is making that for you. And that's the logical step down the road.
So you're referring to Europe. So in Belgium, they've legalized euthanasia for children. In the Netherlands, the law defines it as you become an adult at the age of 16. So the law in the Netherlands says you can decide for yourself at 16 for euthanasia. But between 12 and 16, you can only have death with parental consent. But they allow babies to die by euthanasia under the Groningen Protocol. Canada is right now debating euthanasia for children. So we now have a government committee. Thinking how crazy Canada's gone, we've got a government committee that's debating the issue of whether we should allow euthanasia for children. Now let's think about this. If it's okay to kill an 18-year-old, why isn't it okay to kill a 17-year-old? So I understand the argument.
It's true. That is
If it's okay to kill an 18-year-old, why can't you kill a 16-year-old? I get the argument. I understand the argument. So the problem is in the first place that we're killing people. Once you start killing people, why can't you kill a 16-year-old if you can kill an 18-year-old? Like, honestly, you have to start thinking through. There's actually quite a logical extension, even though... And now the other thing we're talking about is euthanasia by advance directive. So they're saying, well, you know, what if someone is incapable of asking for euthanasia, but, you know, they would have wanted it? How could you deny them this if they would have wanted it? And this is the kind of argument they're making. So the whole concept of consent is up in the air because they're saying, well, so-and-so would have wanted to die. Why can't they just put it in their advance directive that on that, so when this person comes to that medical condition, well, then he can decide, because he's been named in the advance directive, you know, the son or the daughter or whatever can decide, today's the day mom dies because she put it in her advance. What's insane about it all becomes it actually is completely inconsistent because it undoes their argument for legalization. Their argument for legalization is it's all about my body, my choice, my consent, which is all a lie, but still, when you now say you don't have to consent anymore and someone else will consent for you, you know, and the same thing with children, when you say someone else can consent. So the whole argument goes up in the air. It actually makes it more clear. It's now about killing. It always was about killing.
Wow.
Right. Gosh.
And that's where it goes.
I'm trying to wrap my brain around all of this. But we have to take a break. We'll do that really quick. But when we come back from that, I want to talk about this other bill, the 75-year.
We'll get into that. Yes, we'll get
that
into
one's
completed
gonna
life.
Because that one's scary. So we'll do that when we come back in just a minute. Texas Right to Life is facing 14 lawsuits from Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry. They're suing us because we helped pass the Texas Heartbeat Act. And they're trying to scare us pro-lifers into backing down. Please join us in the fight against Planned Parenthood and donate to protect the Texas Heartbeat Act. You can fight for the unborn and build a pro-life Texas that values every human life. Go to texasrighttolife.com/lawsuit to make your contribution. Every cent will help, and it's greatly appreciated.
Social media companies are hiding pro-life content from you. Fight back against big tech. Text pro-life to 40237 for direct access to the best pro-life news. Since 2019, our web traffic has been down 90% because of big tech censorship. Stay ahead of the censors. When you text pro-life to 40237, you're in control, not some algorithm telling you what you can and cannot see. Join now. Text pro-life to 40237.
Welcome back, friends. So I was scrolling through your blog here, and this Japanese dystopian euthanasia film, Plan 75, and you said really there's a law that relates to this thing.
Well, there was a bill in the Netherlands about this. So this whole dystopian film that's actually just gone, it's right now going to these film, what do you call these different...
the festival
Yeah,
things.
film festivals
okay.
and things. And it's a dystopian film. It's actually, I haven't obviously seen it, but it seems quite interesting because the one who filmed it tries to make it very clear. They're making this very serene and beautiful and everything else, but at the same time, it's very harsh because the filmographer, the person producing it, sees it as a very harsh idea, and yet, of course, the euthanasia movement sells as a very caring thing. So anyway, what this is about is the concept of completed life. So in the Netherlands, they've been debating this issue of completed life for at least 10 years now. And so the concept is that at a certain age, I should be allowed to simply go to my doctor and say, my life is complete. I have no purpose for living anymore. I'm of such and such an age, and I'd like to die. So there was a bill in Parliament in the Netherlands. There was an earlier one that was rejected pretty quick, and that had set the age at 70. And then the more recent one, which was rejected, set the age at 75. And you see this government committee report recently rejected the concept of completed life for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons, of course, was they looked at the issue of the age. Why 75?
Exactly.
And
like, what if I've completed my life? I'm turning 28 pretty soon. Like, I think I've peaked. I'm done. So why 75? Why do I have to wait till I'm 75? Like, if that's your line, if that's your concept of you should be able to legally kill yourself at the hands of a doctor, if you think that your life is complete, why 75? Why can't?
That's exactly it. And the fact of it is, in the Netherlands, you already have it doesn't require terminal illness already anyway. So let's say you have significant chronic conditions. You can die by euthanasia in the Netherlands already. Same as Canada. Canada took out last year in that Bill C7 that passed in March of 2021, Canada eliminated that requirement that you be terminally ill. So now the question is, well, for what reason can you die? Well, there's lots of reasons you can die, and this is the whole big debate around how do you do that. Anyway, the whole thing about completed life is this whole movement. And so it was actually a political party in the Netherlands who were promoting that. So this dystopian film is not coming from just a concept of, well, what would happen if the government had a policy that we can do euthanasia at the age of 75? Well, the film goes to the fact that the government in this case would be promoting it.
Right.
The film, so they're promoting this. Now, obviously, there's a cost savings and everything else. But in the Netherlands, they are clearly looking at it as, they call it once again, this new freedom. This doesn't take us very far for the concept of straight suicide itself, because the fact of it is someone might have suicidal ideation for many reasons, right? And someone might become very lonely and depressed because their family members have passed on, or let's say they have no family near them, etc., and they feel they've lost purpose, meaning, or value. And there's nothing new to that. Like,
or they've just been stuck in their room for 2 years because lockdowns.
And told to wear a mask. Yeah, right. I know. There's a lot of reasons someone might think that there's no purpose, meaning, or value to their life. On top of it, if you consider how our Western society is, and I have big issues with this, how we institutionalize people who are older. Mm-hmm. So now we put them in institutions, and we say, well, that's our best way to care for them. Well, no, actually, it's the worst way to care for people, because now you're taking them out of their communities. You're putting them in institutions. You are dehumanizing them in a sense. Now, I can understand certain cases. You can see how people start promoting this concept of completed life.
Yeah.
To me, it's a crazy idea to kill people. But now you're coming up with this.
We talked about that last week on the podcast too, how we're made for community. We are supposed to be dependent on each other. And I think that whenever people look at the assisted suicide and euthanasia debate and they rationalize, well, yeah, I wouldn't want to be a burden on my family. I wouldn't want to be saddling them with that responsibility. And I hear a lot of people say that of, I don't want to be a burden on my family. And that's actually, depriving not only you of the life that you've lived with your family, but it's also depriving your family of this opportunity to grow. And yes, we're going to suffer and it's going to be difficult. And yeah, maybe you are going to be a burden to them, as in like requiring that extra time. But this is a spiritual benefit, I think, for everyone, that being there and sacrificing for your loved one in that way, we're all lifted up, even when it's difficult, even when it's painful.
So when I define this issue, I look at it a similar but a little different, because I look at what it means to be human. And so in my human nature, it's important that I be with others, as you're talking about. Exactly. That's how we are made to be, whether you're a believer in God or not. That's how we are as humans, okay? It's that simple. It's part of the nature of the human person. And when you consider this whole question of what's happening in our culture, there's a lot of people who are lonely. So by putting them into an institution, you're actually removing them out of their community. So this is not a good idea. But I'm going to go one step further. I got a call recently from a woman in British Columbia who had been approved for MAID, medical aid in dying, euthanasia. She had been approved. And yes, she does have a terminal condition. There's no question about that. But what it is that she's alone and she's lonely. She's in poverty. She has really bad arthritis. She can't go to the grocery store because she can't walk. She walks a little, but very little. She can't wash her clothing because she can't go downstairs in her apartment building to wash her clothing, her things in the machine anymore because she's not physically capable. She's got no family near her anymore. You start adding it up. She had no food in the fridge. She decided, I can't live this way any longer. So she applied for MAID and she was approved for MAID, medical aid in dying, euthanasia. And then somehow she was speaking to someone who happens to be a supporter of our group, and she ends up talking to me, and now she's alive and happy to be alive.
Wow.
And so what were the issues here?
Alex, that's crazy.
No, but what are the issues here? The issues are she's in poverty and she's saying, I can't live this way. Now, if you think about this, a lot of people go through that. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people go through loneliness. And a lot of people, their families don't live near them anymore. And a lot of people feel that their life has lost purpose, meaning, or value. And now when you legalize euthanasia or assisted suicide, the end result when they're in their deep down situation is, well, we can kill you.
Yeah.
So yes, they might have medical conditions. I'm not going to argue that. They might have significant medical conditions. But in the past, if you had a medical condition, in Texas, you don't have legal assisted suicide. But I mean, in states where they have legal assisted suicide, when you're going through those significant medical conditions and you're experiencing suicidal ideation, which is not new to the human experience.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's normal in many ways to the human experience to experience some of these feelings to different degrees. Now you can die by lethal injection or you can die by lethal drugs. Yeah. And this is somehow freedom. No, this isn't freedom. This is abandonment. Yeah. You're abandoning people. So this woman's alive in British Columbia, happy to be alive. Why? Well, what did she need? She needed some groceries. So she even said to me, well, when they approved me for medical aid in dying, I was surprised that they didn't even offer me a sandwich.
Oh my God.
She could see that I had nothing. And they approved me for medical aid in dying. She says, and then they were calling me up on the phone, she was saying, because she hadn't planned her death yet. She hadn't set the date yet, okay? So she's getting these phone calls. So she says to them, well, because the group in Canada is called Dying with Dignity. So she thought, well, if I get approved for medical aid in dying, maybe the Dying with Dignity group is going to allow me to live with dignity before I die with dignity. So she says she asked them, she got this one phone call, they're asking her about, different things. They're wondering why she hasn't planned her death yet. And so she's, the doctor to come there and give her the injection. Anyway, she said, well, do you guys not have a program to at least have someone bring me some food?
Wow.
And they said, well, we don't have a program like that. And when she said it to me, I said to her, because they're not about your living. They're about you dying. They're about killing you. So, we're about helping you live.
Yeah.
We recognize you need your laundry done. You need to be able to have someone help you take a bath. We see that. We can understand that this is all about living. That, in fact, you can live until you die. It is possible if we care about you. And this is the whole thing that comes down to these issues. But the culture's changed. I recognize that. And we have to understand more and more the importance of the caring interdependence of the need for me to care about even you.
Even you, Brent.
Thanks, man. Well, let's talk a little bit more about what your org does. We didn't really talk about that. We introduced you by name, but what your org does.
Does not everyone know who I am? Okay, I'm the executive director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. I've been doing this since 1999. So we're a group that's involved with the whole spiel of the issues related to euthanasia and assisted suicide. We started in Canada, but we've become international. So I'm involved throughout Europe. I'm involved throughout, all these different places like Australia, New Zealand, etc., and the U.S. with assisted suicide. But what we do is we do a lot of education. As you see, I run a blog that's constantly publishing articles. I publish my blog spot, the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition blog. So you can go to our website, Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. It's easy to Google, and then you can click on my face, and it takes you to our blog. It's not hard to notice my face, and then you'll notice that it's the world's most comprehensive source of information on these issues. So we do a lot of education. We have support services that we offer. There's a counseling service that we're part of. We also connect ourselves. There's a charity that is connected to what we do, and the charity is involved with training people and helping people to do visiting. It also does issues like helping the lady in British Columbia to make sure she can have her laundry done and things like that. But on top of it, we're involved with the whole social concept of what is this thing called killing, right, and why are we doing this in the culture? And so, I do a lot of talks all over the world on that. Yeah.
As we're about to wrap up, you talk about how you walk with those individuals who are facing these difficult situations, and it's because they feel like they don't have value to their life. They feel hopeless. what is something that we can do to our own communities, people in our own circles, to make sure that if they're in this place, we're reaching out, or if we think they're going to get to this place, what can we do for that?
So as much as in Texas assisted suicide is not legal, you have to recognize the fact that there's a lot of loneliness in our culture, a lot of loneliness. So if you're part of a community, you know that you've got neighbors, let's say, who are older, or someone who's got significant health problems, it's important to go out of your way and care about people. It's really important. I'll give you a very quick story. I'm going to end this very quick. I got a call from a woman whose husband had been a pro-life leader in the 90s. And here he's in palliative care. He's nearing death, and he's asking for MAID. He's asking for MAID. And she's calling me distraught. She's asking me, how could this be? This is something he's never believed in. So what does it mean to be human? And I think this is an essential question to this, how this affects us when you legalize this. What it was is that in the middle of the night, he was going through significant existential distress, and a nurse came up to him and talked to him for 2 hours in the middle of the night when he was most vulnerable, and convinced him that, in fact, medical aid in dying, euthanasia, was the best thing for his situation. And the next morning, he was asking for it.
Wow.
Now, you would say, how could that be? It's because he was a human being going through an extremely vulnerable condition. So human beings, we become vulnerable in certain situations. So it's not that I have a wheelchair that makes me vulnerable. I don't have a wheelchair, but if I did, it's not that I have a disability. It is that I'm in a certain condition, emotionally, psychologically, existentially, whatever it might be at that point. I'm going through a terrible time. I might have a health condition too. And so now the issue comes before me, and it's a threat actually to my life. It's not about my freedom. It's not about my choice, my autonomy. Yeah. It is a threat to my life. It's about ending my life. It is about killing me. That's what it's about. And I'm in a mode in that time as a human being that I'm open to it. And that's what this is about. You need to visit people. You need to be with them. In that case, he ended up dying a natural death. I spoke to his wife. I made it very clear how she has to talk to him and intervene with him. And she did so. He did die a natural death. And as I say, it's not until after he died that she found out this one nurse actually came up to her, and explained, oh, I had spoken to your husband, and she thought she had done a wonderful thing. And the man's wife was just flabbergasted. You mean you're the one who convinced my husband in the middle of the night? You telling me this? You convinced him that he should have MAID?
Wow.
When he was vulnerable? Think about it. Some people think it's a wonderful thing too.
Yeah. You know, we, as an office, we do our Bible study, and we just finished the book of Job, and I can't help but feel like, you know, in the middle there where Job's friends are coming to him and going, you know, I don't know what you did, but just curse God and die, man. Like, if it had been an option, Job might have in that moment gone, you know what, maybe I should call a doctor and take care of this. You know, he was obviously in a real dark place in some moments and had been through a lot. But you get to the end of the book where God has restored everything, and he's made it through that time. You know, if you cut it off, you don't get to the end of the book. No. You don't know what happens.
And that's the whole thing about euthanasia and assisted suicide. It's about killing someone, and you can't come back from that.
Nope.
It's not about accidental killing. A lot of times we talk about medical treatment issues. It's not about that. We're talking about actually intentionally causing their death. This is what it's about. We're opposed to killing people. But we go one step further in how it really is abandoning people. It's about denying them the proper care they need. We need interconnectedness. We need a community that cares. That's what we need. If you know of someone who's going through difficult times, it's good to get out of your way and go visit them, talk to them, care about them. Why? Yeah. Because they're a human being. They need you and you need them. And it makes you more human. Yep. It is what makes you human when you care for others. Our humanity becomes harsh and cruel when we only care about ourselves.
Dang.
Yep. Wow. Mic drop. Thank you for joining us today. I know this wasn't even really a scheduled thing, but you're free and jumped in here, so we appreciate you, man. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for all the work you do.
You're welcome.
Family, share the video. Talk to your friends. Check on your friends and neighbors. And until then, we will see you next week.